Welcome back to Art as a Hobby channel. And today we're going to be working in this workbook. I'm just starting this as I am learning my watercolors. This was highly recommended on several YouTuber channels. It's called Flowers, Feathers, and Animal Friends, and it's the second book by the Mint Gardener, Sarah Simon. Her first book has a lot more of the basics and the techniques and things like that. But what's nice about this workbook is it actually has the watercolor paper in the book. So it really is a workbook where you can paint on the pages. These are the colors that she recommends and that she'll be using throughout the book. And our first task is to paint the swatches. So I have to use 3 different of my palettes to get all of these colors. They're not all within one palette. So primarily, the majority of these are in the Winsor Newton Cotman watercolors, which is their student grade watercolors. I also had to pull out one of my Schminke colors and my professional Winsor Newton paints to be able to get all of these. So let me go ahead and start. I've activated my colors by spraying water on them. I'm going to go ahead and use, there's a number 6 round that she recommends, a number 4 round, a number 2 round, and a 3/0 round. I'm also having micron pens in the size 01, 02. Those will be used later on to help to outline the sketches that she has in the book. I do have a white Jelly Roll pen in case I want to do accents, and an acrylic white marker just in case I need to do some extra things. So for this exercise, I'm actually going to use my number 2 brush, and these are Princeton Heritage brushes. I'm just going to go ahead and get it wet, and then I'm going to go find my lemon hue, okay, which is my very top color. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a good amount of this. And she says to use a wash. So if I just put this on the paper like this, this is wet on dry, and this was not put in my palette to make it a wash. So what do I need to do? I need to go ahead and get some water, get some yellow, get a good amount of it, and put it on my palette. I can add a little bit more water to it to make it more of a wash. The more water you add, the more translucent it's going to be. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and just paint over that. A little bit more water on my brush. Okay, and then you just make it go right on down the line. Okay. You can see where it's more concentrated and then where it gets lighter. So my next one is yellow ochre, which is the top on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and get a good amount. And I'm going to put it right in that next wheel. Get some more. Get my brush wet. Grab a little bit more. And then there, that's a better wash. Your wash wants to be a light, almost like tea. So not very thick. And then I'm going to go ahead and put this on for yellow ochre. You may notice that in my office right now it is quite dry, so these are drying quicker than I can even get them across the page. So we're going to have to work quickly with these. The next one is alizarin crimson, which is 5th one up. Okay, so I'm just going to grab some of that on my palette, on my brush, put that into this wheel. Okay, get a little bit of water, add some of that to here, make it more of a wash, and then we're going to go ahead and do this. There you go. And you can see by the end I'm getting dry again. So just add some water to my brush and keep it moving. That's the great thing about watercolor, is you can always thin it down. So you always want to start with more than you think you're going to use, because once these dry, they'll also be a different color. So the next one is burnt sienna. This one, I'm running out of spaces here. So I might have to do my washes on the paper instead of in the palette. I like using this porcelain palette with so many areas for when I'm doing the paintings. I can have lots of different colors set up. But unfortunately, I also run out of them sometimes. I'm going to go ahead and put this on heavy here. I'll just start doing my washes on the paper, since it's really not working so well with the dryness here. Okay, so far, these first four have been out of the Winsor Newton Cotman colors. This next one is Pyrrolene Maroon. So this one I have to get out of my Schminky colors. Ooh, that one softened up really nice. This is going to be good. Wow. Big difference. You can see a difference in the Schminky paint. How much thicker it is. And how much easier it is to move across. And these Schminky are actually the professional lines. So you can see a little bit of the difference between the Cotman series and the student grade of Winsor Newton. And then the regular of the Pyrrolene Maroon. Oxide of Chromium is on my palette for my professional brand. So let's go ahead and grab that. Six. Okay, and then this is going to be Oxide of Chromium. I did not get this one wet ahead of time, so it's going to take just a second to get it so I can pick it up good. And like I said, I hadn't wet that one yet, so it's not completely ready, but you can also see how much darker, even though I add water to it, it's still more solid than the Cotman series. And that's why it's better to get 3 colors of professional quality watercolors than it is to get a whole palette of the student grade. Next one is Cobalt Blue. And yes, I have to look at all of the swatch cards I did for the palettes to know which one's where. That's a pretty blue. There we go. And then Payne's Gray. She recommends using the professional grade of Winsor Newton Payne's Gray because it's a lot better, she says. So I'm going to do that again. Just grabbing it off of my Winsor Newton Professional palette. And I'm going to go ahead and use this. Wow. And Payne's Gray is usually what's used instead of black because it is so dark. And then Ivory Black. I am letting my paintbrush be a little bit more wet than normal, just because some of these colors have already started to dry. So it's hard to get the paint onto my brush. And this is Ivory Black, and you can see that is very dry. So there we go. Now we can get some paint off. And you can see this is the student color again. So it's not as creamy as the Schminky or the professional Winsor Newton. And then Pyrrolene Violet. I do not have a Pyrrolene Violet. I do, however, have a Cobalt Violet. So I'm going to use that instead. And that is I just need to get that wet again. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick up some of this violet, which is cobalt violet. And again, I didn't warm these ones up with a little water ahead of time. So there we go. Okay. And so these are the colors that we're going to be using in the book. So now we're just gonna go ahead and wash off my brush, get it dried off, and then we can move on to the next page. So we'll see you back here in just a moment. The next step is to practice our pens. So I'm using a Pigma Micron 01 level or size, and 01 refers to the size of the nib. And this is what we're going to use to trace the outlines, like when you sketch. So they want you to test your pens over here to see what kind of lines you can get. And so the first one I'm going to do Okay, so this next step, you'll notice that she's grayed out the flowers a little bit more so that we can practice our boundary drawing. So I'm going to take a Micron O2 pen and we're going to just outline the flower so that we can see the boundaries a little bit better. So I like starting at the top and going around the edges around the beginning. And you just follow the lines around the paper. And this is a good way to really learn how to draw too. So if you're not great at drawing your own sketches, like I'm not, this is a great way of just it's got lots of water in it. So I keep just dabbing it off to the side on my paper towel so I can get this to blend nice. There we go. We're all blended. So now we need to let that dry so that we can do wet on wet. So while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm going to go over here and get my ivory black. And I need a place to put it. So grab another palette, bring this out. Go ahead and make a puddle of the ivory black. And I don't need that much, so I'm just going to make it very light and keep it kind of a thick consistency. Because I'm going over it with dry on dry. Okay. And then here I'm going to grab a little bit more yellow ochre. I'm going to reset that and get that going as well. So I can get some more thicker paint for the dry on dry. Okay. And then to get this dry faster, use a little heat tool. And when you do use the heat tools, make sure you're moving it back and forth. So that's all nice and dry now. So now we're going to do on top of it that lamp black and the yellow ochre on top. Okay, so first is lamp black. I'm going to wet my brush just because it's been sitting for a little bit. Make sure there's not a lot of drips when you do wet and dry. You don't want too many drips. Okay, so I'm just going to dip it in that black. Come over here, and I can tell it's got a drip on it, so it's too much water. There we go. Make sure let's just make a black box. And then make some little lines. It's one of the things you can learn with your brush, is it can make broad, little tiny strokes, or if you push down a little bit further, it makes some nice big strokes. So again, we're just practicing. We know we're going to have to curve with the B, so we want to make sure we practice our C's so we can make them smooth. Okay. So I'll wash off my brush, good. Then we're going to go into that yellow ochre. Get a nice wash of that. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing. Bring it down. Seems like we have different yellow ochres. Okay. And then the same thing. Make some smaller dots, some thin lines, some C's, and just make some marks. Okay. So now we're going to do our B. So you can see there's a little bit more detail. Instead of just being a big wash, there's actually lines that we make. So we're going to go ahead and get that started. We start that with the lemon yellow over the body. And in this one, it's okay if it dries, right? Because we want to put this bottom layer on, let it dry, and then do the top layer. We don't want it to blend, we want it to stand out. So I'm going to go ahead and get this all covered with the lemon yellow. And again, because this technique is wet on dry, we'll make sure that it's all dried up before we start. So I'm going to clean my brush because you never want to let paint dry on the brush. Okay. And I'm going to use my heat tool again to get these bees dry. dried up. So now we go in with our yellow ochre and put the lines. Okay, so I'm just going to grab a little bit of thick. This one you want a little bit thicker. Okay, and then we're going to just do the lines. So she did a little bit of lines here and there. So let's just go ahead and make some little lines. Just copying her pattern. She fills in some of this. Very bottom for some shading. And then just going over where they have the lines on it. The top here. And then again some lines. You want to keep your, when you're making these kind of lines, you want to make sure you're holding the brush almost perpendicular to it so that you can get these fine lines in here. Blot that one. When you blot it, it can make some interesting shapes and colors. I'm just glazing some reds in here. Just let it pop. So that's that color. I think we're good. We left some white highlights behind. We made some of it the yellow ochre, some of it the crimson, and then the combination for sunset. And now we're going to go over here and look at the boundaries. So first, they want a defined boundary. So let's go ahead and get our micron pencil, our pen. Again, I'm using the 02, and I'm just going to outline everything so that we have something to follow. And it doesn't get lost when we start putting paint on things. And for me, it's a little bit difficult because with me being very analytical and analysis minded, it's difficult for me to do random. So sometimes with petals and things, you don't want them to be stiff lines. And that's one of the things that I do often. So it's easier for me to trace a flower picture just to get the outline down with these different little bumps that come along with the flower for their leaves and their petals. Also, mountain ranges in the background are kind of difficult for me. One of the tricks I use for that is using paper towels and ripping them and then following along the edges of where I ripped onto paper. So I use that as a stencil essentially. And that helps me to get variable mountains. But I also do a lot of tracing. And you can do tracing in many ways. You can do it with projecting the image you want onto the surface that you're painting. Or you can use a light box and use a light box so that you can see through the paper the image below. You can also tape it to a window if you don't have a light box. And you can also use carbon paper. So there's a lot, and there is white carbon paper so that if you are doing a drawing on black paper or dark paper, you can get white copy paper, white tracing paper, and use that instead. And that helps to do it. Okay. So we're just giving that a second to dry. And you can see all the petals are different colors. So we're not trying to get one color across everything. We're trying to get a little bit of different colors across the board. And this time I'm going to bring my paper towel a little bit closer because I keep having too much on my brush. And I like to be able to dab it and then go in. This first level though, you want it to be kind of wet so that you can do some of the blooms. And you can see here how some of the blooms have come out and made those soft edges. So we want to make sure that we have it to that level. So I'm going to go in with my lightest color first, which is the yellow ochre. And it looks like we're going to do a lot of petals with this. And this will probably be an okay base layer even. And remember, everything dries lighter. So even if you have a little bit extra on here, that's okay. Because especially when we're doing something like this where we want it a little bit wet still, so that we can do it. If you're doing a large painting, you may want to do just small sections at a time so that you don't overdo your area. So for example, if I was doing a larger flower, I might stop there with just 3 petals and switch out to my sunrise color so that I can merge that into some of this bloom. You see how that just took it right up into the next flower. And it helps just to give it a little bit of dimension, a little bit of difference, so that it's more beautiful. And then here, you can see how it's just barely, I get just a touch of my crimson, and then just touch that to this outer area too. And then this has a little bit of crimson as well. Right along that border. Now I have a couple of saturated petals here, so I'm just going to go ahead and do these. Whoops. Dipped it in the wrong paint well. So if that happens, you can get your brush with clean water on it, saturate that color that was the mistake, and blot it up. So I'm going to go ahead and stick that right on there, and you can see almost all my paint is gone from that mistake. So that's another great idea for blotting, is to be able to get mistakes out of here. And there we go. All gone. Okay. So we won't admit that that ever happened. Okay. And get some sunrise here. And I got my brush very wet so that it blooms into the other colors. I'll get these bases as well, so we have a little bit of an accent. And then these are all going to be crimson. This one's more yellow ochre, so let's go ahead and grab the yellow ochre. Put up in here. This one. And let's see. This one over here. That's more yellow. And leaving some of that white space out here for an accent. And this one's more reddish yellow, more yellow, more yellow. And again, you can use any colors you want for this. This is just making sure you understand how to blot, how you keep highlights, how you do different petals with different colors in them. I'm going to pick up just a little bit of this, and I just keep turning my paper towel into different directions. Okay, get a little bit of the red to go back in to make some of these petals a little bit more contrast. Because the way you get the shadows is how you see the flower. So when you have a darker petal near a lower value petal, you'll be able to see it better if there's a darker area near it. So I'm really trying to concentrate some of this crimson in here for these accents. And they have dried a little bit. So another little trick you can do is just with clean water. So I'm washing my brush really good and tapping it off. I want to get just a touch, barely even a drip. Wipe it off on the side. And then I can rub it right across here and just dab it. And you can see that's reanimating that paint to make it be able to feather out a little bit better instead of it being a line. Okay. So I'm just going to keep going here and get these petals done. So in this case, we're just using our regular green oxide of chromium. And we'll put that on the petals and the stem. And you can see they took off just a little bit. I'm going to do that with my brush. So I'm going to clean my brush, dry it off really good on a paper towel, and then go back in and just see if I can pick up just a little bit of this along essentially the vein line. You can see that when I pick it up, it just looks like a nice little accent spot. And then the other one is darker. So once it's a little bit more dry, we can just put a drop of our mixture of Monstria. I'll put that right here at the bottom. We just rub it on just dry so that you can see we're just getting an accent to it. We're not really coloring it as much as we are accenting it. And that's it. So now we're going to do the next rows. The next one is undefined boundary. So where we had this one going in a lot of individual spaces, this one is just one big blob. It's no defined, there's no red petal, there's no yellow petal, it's just all blended together. So for this one, we gotta do our fine liner as our practice. I'm gonna go ahead and outline this one. I'm gonna actually do the next one too. We don't have to wait. That way we went ahead and got that out of the way ahead of time. Okay, so again, this is going to be a loose boundary. So I'm going to go ahead and get my brush wet. And in this case, we're going to use the sunrise color that we mixed up. We're going to make sure that that's a nice wash. Okay, and then we can just start anywhere. And remember to leave a little bit of white space. So we're still staying within the flower, but we just move it around wherever we want to. And you want to make sure you're working kind of fast so that things don't dry out. Again, because we want to add some accents, we want to leave some white space. This is kind of an all over the place. And doing the wet on dry, the dry on wet, wet on dry, it's helping to create some of that color mixing. I just want a very light red here. Let's come back in and get some of this wetter. Get some of this crimson to make some highlights. You want to be careful that you're not leaving straight lines in your flower. And leaving too much weight in some spaces looks like you forgot to finish it. But there we go. She wants a little bit more red, so we'll just add a little bit more red up here along the edges and over here. Start seeing some of that red coming through. And that's all one big flower. I'm going to put some yellow right in the center like that, like she has it, so that we have a little bit of a sunspot right around that white that's there. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Now I gotta do the leaves. These leaves are a bit darker, so we're gonna start with our Monstera. Put that on the outside of this one. I'm gonna take my green, drop it right inside. See how that comes out. Be good once it dries. Pull that color right over here to this one. The top's just a titch darker. And then I'm going to do a little bit of a lift in this left-hand one, just so we get it up a little bit. I'll make it kind of into a line. Go right in the center of it. A little bit too strong of a pressure, but that's okay because we can fill it back in. And we'll leave just that little bit of a line naturally now. Here we go. All done. Okay, and so our last one, be an undefined boundary. So this is probably going to be better with a wet on wet, honestly, because then it'll give it a chance to move. So I'm going to get my clean water on my brush, and we want this one to go slightly outside the edges. Okay, so when I wet my paper, I'll purposely go out a little bit, because wherever there's water, the paint will move. Okay. So now we're going to go in. Almost looks like she does a more pink on the right and a more yellow on the left. So I'm just going to start with this Monstera, the sunrise color, and just blot that in. Go right up outside of it as well. Now one of the things though, if you look, it's not just a blob outside. She goes outside of specific petals, and she still makes it look like a petal. So it's not all just a bubble out. Okay, leave a little bit of that in the center for a highlight, and then go back in while it's still wet and add in some of the red color. Again, being careful around the very center. I'm just getting this red color up and into some of these petals.